Aloha and welcome to this walkthrough of the Meteor application template system. This is a system that I'm hoping will be useful to those of you who have just maybe finished doing kind of the hello world Meteor stuff, and you want to be able to get started quickly building kind of mock-up prototypes for your system. This is intended to kind of bridge the gap to the prototype level. There's another kind of hurdle to put it into production that this template tries not to address, so that it can stay fairly simple and not get you confused. Essentially what we're going to do is, unlike kind of the hello world apps, you're going to see in this template, we're going to use this import directory structure that's recommended in the Meteor guide. That means that almost no code is actually manipulated in the client and server directories. Instead, you use import to control both the load order and what actually ends up being imported. We're also going to use flow router so that we can use multiple pages. We're going to use autoform to simplify the development and manipulation of forms, even though kind of not so sure about autoform for production use, but it's nice here. We'll use the accounts package in the standard way, and then we're going to use Semantic UI as our CSS framework. A lot of people use Bootstrap. I used to use Bootstrap, so it's nice to see an example with something other than Bootstrap. You will do simple authorization, authentication, and also we're going to use ESLint. I really highly recommend you use ESLint whenever you do Meteor development, because it's going to catch a lot of errors that otherwise nobody's going to catch until Meteor crashes or just doesn't work right. We set up ESLint here so that you can either invoke it from the command line, or much better yet, run it within your IDE. And it implements both Meteor query standards, Airbnb JavaScript style guide, conventions, and a couple other things that I throw in there. Okay, we're not going to have tests in this template, and we actually are enabling both auto-publish and secure to make prototype development easier. We'll have examples later of how you'd add this stuff in. Typical usage: you're going to install Meteor, create a GitHub repo. I think that probably the best thing to do, you could just make this repository an upstream and merge, but I don't know. I'm thinking these days maybe rather than getting all the complete repo, which it's got a lot of stuff in there you don't need, you could just download a zip file of the application and copy over 2 directories in a file, and you're good to go. This also will avoid merge conflicts with my README and your README. So there's other ways to do it. But at any rate, once you get it done, you cd into the app directory, do npm install and meteor -settings to bring it up with a default password. I'm not going to go through these steps because they're so straightforward. But what happens when the system is running, which hopefully will happen for you very easily, at localhost 3000 you get an initial page like this. You can't do much with this except sign in. You can either create an account if you want, or you can use the default account that's got a username of John and a password of change me. For development purposes, it's no big deal to just reveal your account names and passwords. Once you do that, you can see I'm now logged in as John, and I have 2 pages that are now available to me. So I can go to this list stuff page, which has some pre-defined things in it. We implement a very simple collection. It's got 2 fields, a text name field and a numeric quantity field. We can add things to it. So let's add a horse, and we've got 4 horses. Submit that, and now we can see that we've got a horse. If we decide, oh, actually we have like 6 horses, we can do that. Okay, that's basically it for the application. Not a lot going on, but that's actually, I think, going to be good enough to get you started, I hope. Notice that if we were now to sign out, that page is no longer accessible to us, and we have this template being displayed. So that's how it works. There's really not a lot to it, and that's hopefully a feature, because it should be relatively simple to understand what's going on. Okay, so our top level directory structure is that we have this app directory that holds the Meteor application. Then we have a config directory where you are going to put files, and at this point I'll move over to the GitHub repo directly, so you can see that I have a settings.development.json file here. This is a public file that you can put, for development purposes, whatever kinds of settings you want. Here's an account setting, but you can put other stuff in there as well. The other thing you probably want to do is develop a settings.production.json, which holds the actual secrets that you don't want published. And in the git ignore, you can see we ignore any files named settings.production.json. So you could create one of these files, put it in your local repo, and then commit code, and it will not go up to GitHub. And that's kind of a recommended practice for dealing with settings. Okay. So that's the config directory. We have a doc directory that just holds documentation, stuff that you don't want actually in your Meteor application, you want as part of your repo. So there's convention of having a doc directory there. Okay, so that's the top level. The more interesting directory structure is the app directory. This is the structure for our Meteor app. Top level, client imports node modules, that's created and managed by Meteor. Public and server. This is, again, if you go to the Meteor guide and look at the application structure, this is what they're currently recommending. And what this means is that the client main.js, as you know, the client, whatever's in the client directory is going to be loaded eagerly when the system starts up, and whatever's in the server directory is going to be loaded eagerly when the system starts up. And whatever's in the imports directory is nothing's going to happen in there at all unless somehow through the loading of these two files, stuff in here gets loaded. And that's this whole like import approach. Okay, I'll just parenthetically note that Semantic UI suggests that it be installed into a client/lib directory, so I do that. I don't know if that's good for Meteor 1.4 or not, but what the heck, it works, and is not too bad because these aren't really kind of application level files. They're kind of like framework files that you never touch or rarely touch, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so the idea in Meteor 1.4 is that somehow this main.js here and here are supposed to be the single entry points that should result somehow over time or whatever in getting all of the code that's needed to run on the client or server or both sides to be run. And if you look at their kind of sample to-dos app, you'll see only one file is imported by this, and then you go in there in the startup, and then that does more imports, and you're like following through 15 different files to figure out how everything gets loaded. I found that I can understand why. It's very modular and kind of componentized, but it makes it really hard to understand, A, what order things are being loaded in at a kind of a high level, and secondly, has everything that needs to be loaded actually gotten loaded? Because you almost have to trace through all these different levels to figure out what's going on. So in this particular application, I'm taking a different approach. It's nicer in some ways, it's not as nice in other ways. It's just a different way, but I think for beginners with importing, this has some advantages. And the idea here is that if we go into the app and we know that on the client side, when Meteor starts up, it's going to eagerly load this file. And what you'll see in here is a set of import statements that basically specify to load the entire application with respect to client level stuff. These are the directories containing client level stuff, and you got to load everything in them. Okay, and the reason why you got to load everything in them is because when you just see a directory specification, there's an implicit index.js put at the end, just kind of like you have an implicit index.html for web apps. Okay, so if we were to go to client startup, import startup client, so let's go to import startup client and look at that first one, import startup client. Here's a directory with some code, actually a single file, and then there's this index.js file, which is responsible for loading all the code in that directory. So the basic idea, the way that this app implements imports, is that there's basically only two levels to it. So there's the top level main.js in both client and server directories. That has, each of those will import all of the directories that it needs, and then in all of these directories there will be an associated index.js that loads all of the files in that directory. So to get kind of a better example of that, if we go to imports, UI, pages, okay, here's a bunch of files in this directory. Look at our index.js. It's going to import every single thing in that directory. Okay, so that is the basic approach to importing in this, and it means that if you forget to import something, then either you've created a new directory and you need to add it to your main.js, or you've created a new file within an existing directory and then you need to add it to the index.js inside that directory. So there's kind of only two places. Okay, now I want to also kind of note that when you have these top-level import statements that implicitly load an index.js, what that ends up doing is it loads the code, but it doesn't make symbols visible. And so there's kind of two things that happen with imports. One is you just need the code to be loaded, and the second thing, you need symbols to be accessible. This approach that I'm doing here is good for ensuring that all the code has loaded. And in Meteor, you know, the canonical problem is you forget to load one of those silly .html files containing templates. And this approach kind of minimizes the odds that you'll forget about an import. And if you do forget about an import, it's pretty easy to go through and mechanically just check, okay, any directory that has code, does it have an index.js? Any index.js, is it loading all the files in that directory? And if those things are true, then you're going to be fine. But the import, though that approach does not mean that a symbol that you need within a file will necessarily be defined. So here's an example of a file where even though, you know, the code has been loaded for API stuff.stuff.js, we need in this file to reference a symbol, stuff, that is in that file. So we have another import statement here. Fortunately, imports don't like redundantly load code if they don't need to, but we have this import statement as well to ensure that that stuff symbol can be referenced later and that we're referring to the right one. Okay. Naming conventions. So there's a lot of different, there's just an aggravatingly large number of ways people name things. The convention that's in this template I'm going to heartily recommend, in fact for my students I'm going to demand, but for the rest of you heartily recommend the approach that files and directories are always all lowercase with dashes between them. So you can see like a semantic UI if you have multiple words, or if we go app imports, I don't know, startup, both. Yeah, there's an accounts.config. So all lowercase, dashes, definitely no spaces. That's your file name conventions. And then JavaScript variables that are kind of global, globally referenced throughout the application, like a collection. You capitalize it. So for example, the stuff, the variable stuff is capitalized because it refers to a collection. And then, other JavaScript variables are named in this kind of standard JavaScript fashion, which is camel case. The next thing is templates. What I am going to recommend here is that when you name templates, so for example, here is a template definition, a template file. The template is going to be named capitalized with underscores, the same as the name of the file, which is lowercase with dashes. Okay, so if you have put a dash in a JavaScript variable name, it's kind of a not good thing. So what you notice is a lot of the use of this underscore for template names. I like that, and here's another one right here. The main point is to not have inconsistent capitalization and inconsistent use of separators. And so the consistency is that files and directories are all lowercase with dashes, and then these templates, as well as the routes, are capitalized with underscores. Okay, so here's a template, and you can see all of our templates have that same kind of approach. Well, it'd be better to see an HTML file. So here's the edit stuff page in the file named edit-stuff-page, and then if we go ahead and look at our routes, which are probably somewhere around here, what you can see is I name the routes the same as the page that they go to. Now remember that Flow Router has this kind of conceptual notion of a template that is a page, and by that they mean that it's a template that's going to be referred to in this Blaze layout render, where unlike a page you have a quote-unquote layout, which is something that generally has the menu on the top and the footer on the bottom, and then in the middle, sandwiched in there, is your page stuff. Okay, makes a lot of sense. That's the way many web apps are designed. And so the notion here is this is not a page, but all the and it is a template though. It's a layout template, but every template that functions as a page in the sense that Flow Router thinks about pages will always have this underscore page at the end. And then we're going to name the route, because by definition these routes are supposed to go and include pages. Then it makes sense that we could actually name the route with the page that it's supposed to be routing to. Yeah, get that? Okay, so you can see the name list stuff page, and list stuff page is the template name, and it's it's designed to be rendered within this app body layout. Okay, a lot of complications for something super simple once you see it. Okay, so that's the naming conventions that I'm using. Here are the set of packages that I'm using in the system, minus the basic Meteor packages that you get with all of them. And you can see we've got some autoform. Well, in a nutshell, we've got stuff for form processing, we've got stuff for account processing, we've got stuff for routing, and we got stuff for presentation. Okay, and again, this is like a basic template. This is meant for beginners or people who are 1 or 2 weeks beyond the beginning stage, need something that they can build on to quickly start mocking up an application with multiple pages, which is what this is kind of ideal for, because you've got the flow routing. It's easy to create a menu bar with links to a bunch of different pages. Everything's all set up for that. As you get further into it, you've got to probably have more sophisticated forms, and you need to implement privacy, so you got to get rid of auto publish and insecure. But at this point, you can do that stuff later. What you probably want to focus your energies on right now is just what the heck does my thing look like. Okay, so I've shown you. We went through before. Here are the screenshots of what it looks like if it's running. There's a single collection in here called stuff, and it's super simple, but it does give you the idea of defining a simple schema, and in this case we associate with autoform. And the nice thing there is that it does validation for you to make sure that the quantity is always going to be a number. In fact, it's funny, if you try to go to the template, let's just sign in again. I noticed this. Okay. If you go here and you try to type something that's not a number, hear that? I'm hitting the D key and it doesn't even respond. So that's kind of cool. But if I hit a numeric key, it works. I didn't know that. That was kind of cool. So anyway, this is where our schema is defined. And then we have initialization. So when this application starts up, if there's nothing already in the stuffs collection, it's going to go through this stuff seeds variable and define a basket, a few baskets, and a couple bicycles, just so there's something in there when it starts up fresh. Okay. Then I want to note that you don't have to publish the stuff collection, and you don't have to subscribe to the stuff collection, because we've got auto publish enabled, again for initial prototyping purposes. That's convenient. However, this doesn't mean that you don't have to worry about whether or not you're subscribed to everything before you render a page. And so when you have a template that's rendering data from a collection, you definitely want to do this design pattern of wrapping whatever you're rendering. So in here, see, we're going to do stuff list, and we've looked at the helper that's going to do a find on the stuff collection. So we want to make sure that our client side has received all of our stuffs before we try to print it out. And the way that we do that is basically having this if template subscriptions ready, and then if it's not ready, we'll show this little spinner until the subscriptions are ready. Again, when you have 2 items, it's unlikely that they won't be there, but you always want to be using this approach to make sure that your page doesn't get messed up by trying to render itself before the data is there. Okay, CSS, we're using Semantic UI, and we're using the standard Semantic UI package that has some installation stuff that I already went through, and so you don't have to kind of install Semantic UI when you download this template. It's already there inside the app client lib Semantic UI directory. If you want to edit, you want to create a custom theme for Semantic UI, then you have to go into this directory and you got to edit this customization file, and Meteor will rebuild it. You can look at the Semantic UI package to get documentation on how to do that. Okay, but for most people, when you're prototyping, well, who knows whether you're going to fiddle with Semantic UI at that point or not. If you have to do simple customizations, you can just go into the style.css file right here and add stuff. For routing, we're using Flow Router. The definition of the routes are here. We've already seen that. It's very straightforward. Just basically a global, one single global top layout style file, and in fact we might as well just quickly go look at that. So we go to layouts, we can see this app body, here's that template, and basically it says render a header, render our page, which is what that template dynamic thing does, and then render a footer. And so we go to layouts, you can see header, here's our header that contains our nav bar, and likewise our footer is somewhere in here, so on and so forth. Okay. 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 Forms, we're using AutoForm. We use the quick form component. So for example, here's a template for adding stuff. We use quick form, but boy, you can't get much quicker for rendering a form associated with a collection, as long as you want to use their kind of default layout and so forth, which oftentimes is perfectly reasonable. So you can look at this in the associated add stuff page.js file. You can see you have a hook for saying what you should do when the thing is successful, and then you have a helper to get the stuff collection. So you can use this and get pretty far if you're happy with AutoForm and the way it does things. Authentication, nothing nothing non-standard here. We're going to have a little configuration of accounts here to have that username only style, and for pages that we need to have the person logged in order to see, we first define this template called if logged in. It's like a layout kind of thing, not a page, right? And basically it says, look, if they're in the process of logging in, we show this. If they are logged in, then we show whatever it is we want. Otherwise, we show this page basically that says you're not authorized. And so if we then go to a page that requires the person to be logged in, like adding stuff, what you can see is we just wrap it in this if logged in kind of wrapper thing. And that's how we guarantee that anybody trying to display the add stuff page is either going to see the page if they're logged in, or they see that you see that little div that says you have to log in if they aren't. Very straightforward. Configuration, as I said before, you want to have a settings.development.json and a settings.production.json. The settings.development.json you can commit to GitHub. The settings.production.json you don't want committed to GitHub, and the ignore file does that. Finally, eslinrc. This is the file that defines the standards. So we're going to use the Airbnb standards for JavaScript. We're also going to use the recommended practices by Meteor, except we're going to do a little bit of fiddling with the templates, and we're going to turn off this template names rule. Meteor sometimes, so arrow callbacks are something new in ES6. Unfortunately, Meteor, like sometimes it's okay with you using it, and sometimes it's not, and that's, I can't remember when it's good and when it's bad. So my view is, at least until I remember, or until Meteor actually has consistent implementation of it everywhere, that I'm not checking to see that you're using arrow call, or I'm not defining a rule that says you have to use arrow callbacks. Line break style. This is turning off so that Windows people don't have to have Unix line breaks, and then I'm allowing the maximum line length to be 120. Okay, so that's the set of rules anyway today. You can run this from the command line using npm run lint. That's because in the app directory, if you look at the package.json, up here I have a script called start, which invokes this, and so you can say meteor npm run and then the name of your script. Actually, it's the lint one, so medium npm run lint will actually invoke that script, which will invoke lint. It should run without any errors, at least for me, unless I did something weird. It passes ESLint. That said, oh my goodness, you should always be using ESLint within your IDE. So for example, if I said, stuff with a capital T, okay, all of a sudden it's going to say, hey, stuf is not defined. And by the way, up here, you're defining stuff, but you're never using it. Okay, that's pretty good information to tell you, you got a misspelling, and it's either you've misspelled up here or you've misspelled down here. So definitely have automated support for ESLint to run automatically within your IDE. You will never regret it. Okay, and there will be so many bugs at runtime that you'll never even know you might have had, because you will have just fixed it as a natural part of doing development, because ESLint will save you from so much frustration. So make sure you're using an IDE like IntelliJ that will run ESLint silently in the background and let you know when things are bad. Okay, that's it. Hope you like that, and see you next time.